So my name's David Thompson. I am co-founder and director of Employer Branding Made Easy. We support TA teams and employer brand teams with upskilling training through courses and mentoring. And also we provide project delivery where they need it. So I've been working in employer branding for about 25 years, since way before it was called employer branding, when it used to be called good old recruitment marketing and recruitment advertising. My background is agency, so I've worked on lots and lots of projects from the ground up. And in that time, I've seen the kind of same mistakes happen again and again and again. So if you're working in-house, you'll probably only work on an employer brand project from the ground up once, twice, 3 times, 4 times in your career. So how do you know where the bear traps are? How do you know where the things that are going to go wrong and can potentially trip up your project are? So I thought what I'd do today is just take you through 10 things that I've observed over my career. I could have picked about 100, to be honest, but these are 10 things that I've seen happen quite frequently. So you might recognize some of these yourself, but let's have a look anyway. So the first one is failure to get off the ground in the first place. I'm often asked, what's the most important part of employer branding? And I always say, it's getting the money in the first place and getting the resource in the first place. And we struggle a little bit, I think, in employer branding and TA, sometimes, to kind of get across how important employer branding is. We kind of go to our senior leaders and say, can we have some budget, please? We'd really like to improve our employer brand or do an employer brand project. And they kind of go, right, vanity project, it's not essential, particularly in the current climate, where we're seeing so much focus on the numbers. So the key to getting your project off the ground is writing a really compelling, really relevant business case. So we don't just go to our leaders and say, can we have some money, please? We write a business case, which is focusing in on what's keeping your execs awake at night, what really matters to them, what's going on in your organization that's horrifying them. Is it you're opening a new division somewhere that needs staffing up? Is it problems with retention? Focus in on the things that matter to the business. Think about how your project is going to overcome these and quantify it. So if you're saying, okay, we've got a problem with retention here, it's terrible, but I know my project, typically employer brand's going to reduce, improve retention by 28%. What does that mean for the business? Well, that means we don't have to recruit 100 people a year. That translates to about £2.5 million in recruitment fees. So try and quantify it, make it something tangible and measurable. Share examples of success. My experience is when you're writing business plans for your HR director or your head of business, a little bit of emotional bribery goes a long way. If you kind of go, look, this is what our competitors are doing, look at the success they're having, suddenly it starts to ring bells with them. So show examples of success and show them you know your stuff. Make sure that they see that you understand the business inside out, but you understand what this project's going to be. Show them very clearly that you're really passionate. That's the key to writing a really great business case. And my experience is if you don't write a really good business case, you will struggle to get going in the first place. Point number 2, failing to differentiate. How often have you seen employer brands that look the same, sound the same? The whole point of branding is to make things different. To make us appear different to everybody else so you can make a considered choice as to who you want to join and stay with. But so often we kind of build employer brands from the inside out. We don't look at what everybody else in the market is saying. We don't look at actually what do our candidates want to hear. We're just going to go, done a bit of research, this is what we think we should say, therefore we're going to go out and tell that story. So differentiation is so critical. So I'm just going to share some examples of some things I've seen. I chose the construction industry, but we could apply this to any industry, I think. And if any of you are representatives of any of the companies I'm going to show now, please don't be offended. I'm not trying to have a go at you. I'm just trying to demonstrate the point. So if we look at the top 20 construction companies in the UK, these are 4 that I've chosen. Can you tell the difference about who you'd want to go and work for? What we see is we've got some jobs. We wear high-vis jackets and helmets. That's about it. So there's nothing to emotionally engage you, and there's not a differentiating story. So it all becomes a bit samey. So I don't know who to choose, so therefore they would struggle to find the best talent. Whereas if I pick 4 more, Balfour Beatty. So there's a story which is all about the impact that you're going to have on the business. the way that you are going to shape the business. You're going to be an integral part and you're going to be influential. Care group, talking about the impact on the on communities that they have, the brilliant work they're doing to make people's lives better. Tarmac, talking about the diversity of careers. You're going to do so many different things, so many different places you can work. And Lang O'Rourke, talking about the power of experience. We've been doing this 50 years, so you're going to be working with absolute experts who know their stuff. These organisations have chosen their territory. They've chosen their message. They've researched. They said, what can we say that's different to everybody else that's going to make us more attractive? So differentiation in employer brand is so important, but so often we overlook it. Okay, next problem we see sometimes is trying to tell too many stories at once. It's so tempting when we start working on our employer brand to just go, right, let's just get out there and make some noise. Okay, let's put a post out there about McMillan Cake Day, and then here's us in our Christmas jumpers, and here's some new apprentices starting. Lots and lots of different stories, but actually that doesn't have much net impact on your target audience because you're telling too many stories. If you try and tell 20 stories, by the time you get to number 5, they would have forgotten number 1. So it's really important when you're building your employer brand to have your EVP framework, your employer value proposition framework of 4 or 5 core stories that are universal across your business. You've researched and found, hey, everybody in the business says this is what's unique about us. And stick to those stories and double down on them when you're doing your social media posts, when you're putting new content on your career site. Here's an example we've just completed at the moment. We're working with Autoglass. We've researched across their whole business and found 4 core stories that we can double down on that are universal truths. Everybody in the organisation, to some extent or other, can recognise this. So the purpose of the organisation, the support they give to their people, the quest for better every day, continuous improvement, and the opportunity comes from a growing company. If we tell these stories repeatedly in different ways, in different formats, using different people, they start to lodge in the minds and the hearts of candidates so they can actually make that differentiating choice around you. So resist the temptation just to run out to market and tell as many stories as you can. Figure out your 4 key EVP pillars, maybe 5, whatever it is, and double down on them. Here's another example. This is Robert Half International, a recruitment company we're working with. 4 stories. They're all about people. That's what their business is, essentially people. The shared purpose that they have to make lives better through finding people better jobs. Tomorrow Together, building and improving their organisation, and their focus on well-being in a sector where sometimes well-being is not particularly top of mind for some companies. So stories that they can double down on, keep telling, that really, really help. Okay. Next mistake is the dead duck project, and this one is heartbreaking. This one I've seen so many times, that a project gets started, but then runs out of legs, essentially. Somebody leaves the business, your key stakeholder goes somewhere else, or there's a new project comes along, oh, we need to fix the ATS, we need a new ATS system, and suddenly it kind of slides down the scale of things that are important and loses momentum. Momentum is, if you're developing an employer brand and you're building a project, to me, momentum is so important. And the way to make sure you get momentum and keep it is to kind of build a really clear time-bound project plan. So make sure you've identified every step that you're going to take and you've put time against it of when you're going to complete it. So absolutely focused project plan. And when you get there, work quickly because things happen and change really quickly. Make sure you're working as fast as you can, prioritize the work over everything else, and make sure you get it over the line. Make sure your senior stakeholders are involved as well. As we said at the start, if you've done your business planning well, then they will be going, okay, we get this, this is important. They will then be expecting to see outputs, so it helps get things done. So ensure your senior stakeholders are engaged. Make sure your project group is big enough and resilient enough. Again, problem I come across so often is there is one person saying, I'm going to do this project, and then when they step aside, it kind of grinds to a halt. So make sure your team's big enough and resilient enough to carry the project through. And particularly if you're working with an agency, make sure that once that project is kind of, you've got your brand book and you've got your assets, Make sure that you've got enough resource in-house and enough experience in-house to sustain and manage and nurture. Otherwise, what you're going to end up with is a very lovely PowerPoint presentation which actually doesn't go anywhere. So make sure you are upskilling and you've got the right amount of resource in-house. Okay, number 5 is they need to take the golden threads into the candidate experience. Golden threads is the kind of story you're telling. And I see so much energy sometimes going into telling that story in recruitment marketing, creating emotional content which connects with people, tells a really great story. But then when we come into the recruitment process and people start to apply, suddenly we go into kind of a world of automation in an ATS, and it all becomes a bit cold and mechanical. Make sure that language, make sure those stories are repeatedly told throughout your entire employment experience, your entire candidate experience. Otherwise, it starts to feel really jarring. And what you're doing with your really good emotional story building and employee branding is building emotional equity. And that's what differentiates you from everybody else. But if you don't follow that all the way through the process, all of a sudden it starts to kind of drift away, and suddenly the candidate can't remember why they applied to you in the first place. So, yes, it's all about attraction. Great, you need to be out there telling emotive stories, but make sure it carries on through your engagement. So when they're going through the job application process, they're still feeling that emotional connection on into the hiring process. Make sure your interviewing managers and your hiring managers are briefed on what the brand is about, so they're using the same language and there's consistency. Make sure when you're onboarding, your welcome packs are using the same imagery, the same kind of language, the induction materials and the initial check-ins. Keep that feel-good process going, and then on into the employment experience. So when you're looking at kind of career planning, when you look at performance management, L&D, all the way through the whole employee life cycle, you want the resonating stories to make sure that that emotional equity that you're building up is absolutely retained. Okay, mistake number 6, Sinatra syndrome. So this has happened to me twice in my career. So, but it's really significant when it happens. We have researched the EVP. We've been away, done focus groups. We've pulled together. Okay, here's what the organisation thinks is great about working here. This is the truth about working for us. Play it back to the leadership team, and the MD turns around and says, "No, I don't like it. I want it to say this." It's like, right, okay, it's not really going to work, because if we just do what you want it to say, then candidates are going to kind of join on a false promise. It's not reality. It's not grounded in reality. And existing staff are going to look at this and kind of go, "I don't recognise that. That's not the business I work for." But yeah, I'll do it my way, unfortunately, is Sinatra syndrome. You've got to kind of stand your ground with senior leaders and kind of say, look, this has to be authentic. This has to be real. We need to make sure it's telling the right story. Otherwise, there's really no point in doing this. Having said that, in any EVP, there needs to be a bit of flex. There needs to be a bit of future. So what we usually say is, this needs to be 80% grounded in today's reality, 20% tomorrow's vision, tomorrow's aspiration. There's no harm in having a bit of stretch, as long as they're not going to go, no, I want it 100% to be, what the future's going to be about. So keep it real. Make sure you kind of fight your corner, and make sure that you're only applying a little bit of stretch to your EVP. Number 7, recognise that, telling, not showing. So you heard that in the last presentation from Alchemy Films, and we hadn't seen each other's presentations. So the very fact that we're both saying the same thing shows how important it is. The best, it's a maxim in the movies, is show, don't tell. The best films you watch and the ones that stay with you and impact you most emotionally are the ones where you're observing the characters and how they behave and what they're doing and figuring out what their agenda is, rather than someone standing there and signposting what they're feeling. So showing people and using your own people to tell stories is really, really important. Because if you think, how do we get children to remember important things? How do we warn them about danger? How do we give them important kind of moral stories? We could go to them and say, okay, not everybody is what they appear to be. Envy and vanity lead to destruction. Consistency and perseverance can outlast speed and arrogance, but they're just words, and they won't mean anything. But when we tell them the story of Little Red Riding Hood or Snow White or the tortoise and the hare, they remember it because it's creating an emotional engagement. You remember when you hear stories the facts that you're supposed to remember. So storytelling is so important. But so often in employer branding, We tell. We don't show. So we're going to go, right, we care about equality and diversity and inclusion. Yeah, okay, but everybody says that, and it starts to feel like a box-ticking exercise. But if you do it really well, and again, this is a random example I found, if you do it really well and tell stories behind it, it's got so much more power. So Diageo Group, for example, here on the left, they're telling you about their commitment to equality and diversity, but then they show a film of people sharing their experiences and how that's helped them and supported them in their career development. So showing, not telling is so important. Same on the right, where they're talking about learning and development, then somebody telling stories about how that's worked. So tell stories, bring it to life, use real people and emotive content, because that's how you create emotional engagement, and that's what we're trying to achieve in employer brand. Okay, number 8, failing to measure true value. So we get very hung up in employer brand sometimes about hard hiring metrics. We kind of think the whole point of employer brand is to make sure we get more applications and more hires. And it is, but also there is much more to it. And that's sometimes what we fail to see. So we kind of double down on hiring metrics. Our cost per hire, our time to hire, our completed applications, etc. And that's what we call kind of bottom of funnel stuff. That's where people have come into the recruitment process and come out the bottom. But actually the job of branding is much more than that. So if you go into the world of consumer branding, for example, do Nike measure the power and the quality of their corporate brand by how many trainers they sold in the last 2 weeks? No. It's something much bigger. They know it influences stakeholder value. The global customers are so influenced by their brand. And employer brand is the same. It shouldn't just be measured on these kind of thin hiring metrics. Its job is to get people at the top of the funnel who haven't yet decided who they want to work for in the future, is to engage with them, start getting them passionate. So when they come to make their decisions further down the line, they can just kind of, their mind's already made up. So I think we need to be looking at more, a different set of metrics, which is around sentiment. Are we shifting what people feel about this organization? Are they more likely to want to come and work for us? Here, there's a different set of metrics. NPS scores, Net Promoter Score. So asking candidates, would you recommend this organization as a place to work? Did you enjoy that process? How many people are following you on social media? How many people are interacting with you? How many speculative applications are you getting? How many people are joining your mailing list because they want to find out more about the organization? What are people saying on Glassdoor? Really good way of collecting sentiment measurement. Now, make sure that your measures are connecting and are relevant to what your business is trying to achieve. So we don't just want vanity measures. They need to be relevant to the business. But please don't get locked into just measuring employer brand by how many bums on seats have we got, how many applications did we get. There's a brilliant tool as well called Link Human's Employer Brand Index, where they use hundreds and hundreds of data points to measure the sentimental needle shift of your employer brand, how it's shifting the sentiment towards you. So it's a really good thing to have a look at. So balance your measurement with hiring metrics, but also sentiment metrics. Number 9, struggling to find content. We just had a brilliant conversation with this on our table. So you've researched your employer brand, you've put your EVP together, we've created our brand identity, we've got our playbook, we've got some assets to work with, great, we're great to go. So I'm going to send out an email to the whole company and saying, please can I have your brilliant stories about these 4 themes? And tumbleweed. Okay, we'll try again. And then we try again and again and again, and then it becomes a weekly Friday email saying, please send us some nice stories, we need something to go to market with, and it doesn't really happen. Getting content is quite hard. Now, we talked earlier on, the guys from Real Links at the start talks about ambassadors and advocacy, and that's absolutely the thing to do. Try and build ambassador networks in your business. Try and have representatives in your different areas of people who are not only your employer brand cheerleaders, are going out into the business going, hey, this is why employer branding is really important, but they're bringing back the stories that are going to help, bring your employer brand to life. Otherwise, if you're just kind of sending out a little help wanted, from your own email address, it can be really, really hard work. there are a couple of brilliant tools that I've come across which are probably relevant for bigger enterprise organizations, because the bigger you get, the harder the job gets. And eventually, I think you get to a point where you've really got to let technology do the heavy lifting for you. So a couple of amazing products out there. The Martech is incredible. It kind of uses AI to go out into the business, drag back all of the stories, produce the content for you, schedule it, post it. It just kind of does the whole advocacy piece for you. It's amazing. It's not cheap, but it's amazing. And Paperfly does a not dissimilar thing as well. So, and then we saw Real Links at the start, which I'd never seen their presentation, but if I had, I would have put their logo on this as well, because that's a brilliant tool. But building ambassador networks within your business to kind of find those stories is so important. Okay, last one, turning the employer brand on and off. So employer branding isn't a campaign, but we see it treated that way so often. You know, we get a recruitment requisition coming through, and then suddenly it's like, oh, do a campaign, here's some stories, and then we've filled those roles, all right, we just switch it off again. But if you imagine your employer brand is like, imagine getting a kettle full of water and putting it on the stove. It takes a lot of energy to bring that to life, to bring that to the boil. And the employer brand is similar. To get the energy behind your employer brand, build enough content, build a following takes a lot of effort. But once it's there, if you just keep your kettle simmering, it doesn't take that much energy. You're just doing little and often. And it's a much more efficient way of kind of finding candidates and you know, kind of building awareness. So, you know, if you turn it off again, though, it takes all that energy again to get it back up to the boil. So think of it that way. Think of your employer branding as an always on. Try not to turn it on and off. Always be out there with your content, as we said before. Always be out there finding those stories, bringing them to life in different ways. Use social media to tell those stories little and often. Because that way you start kind of, we talked about top of funnel, you're bringing people in, you're starting to have engagements and conversations with them, and you're moving them into interested people who are really kind of going to want to connect with you. And essentially what you're doing is nurturing relationships, so you're building your own CV database, so when you come around to your next kind of round of recruiting, they're already there for you. So being consistent, keeping your employer activity going is so key, but so often I see it just completely kind of switched off. So there we go. That is 10 little things that I've seen happen in my career that have happened repeatedly. So hopefully you'll see these and won't make these mistakes again. So great to hear if you've seen any others, if you want to kind of put those into the chat group, any other missteps that you might have had. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. I hope there's some stuff in there that was identifiable and useful. And please go and join me on LinkedIn. That's my LinkedIn address there. It'd be lovely to connect with you. Thanks, everyone.